I find myself all the way in Malmesbury, a town a couple of kilometers away from Cape Town, to drive a Mazda 323. This car may or may not get added to the All Things Motoring collection, depending on what it drives like and how this retro review goes. But it's not just any Mazda, it's one of the last 323s ever built, a name that I still believe Mazda should have continued on with. It's also got some interesting little trivia pieces about it, including some very decent mileage. So let's take a deep dive into this special car story and do another retro review.
Well, I'm the only child, and my dad, I was very close to him, and he introduced me to the motor trade. And he was working at Becker Auto, which was then the local Ford and Mazda dealer. And he then very excitedly told me that he's going to trade in his ruby red Mazda Sting on a Mistral green, which was a Volvo pre-production test color. And the SVP stood for Special Vehicle Program, which was an option pack consisting of power steering, remote central locking and aircon added to the normal 130 Sting. That my dad not told me that this is a SVP, there's none of the paperwork on it that suggests what it is. It was literally just an option that had to be ticked. So literally in his handwriting with his last known address, Ford Motor Company only came back into South Africa in the year 2000. So only from 2000 it was built under Ford Motor Company and not Samcor any longer. A couple of companies like Illings, which imported Mazda, Chrysler South Africa and so forth, merged to form a Sigma Motor Corporation. And they had a very wide range of cars, and amongst other brought to South Africa the rear-wheel drive Mazda 323, which became very popular and in the early 80s was South Africa's best-selling car before the Corolla took over from there at the time. Everybody that I've told this car's got power steering, remote central locking and aircon doesn't believe it. They want to see it for themselves. And that's why the crisp aircon sticker in the engine bay and even the Ford Motor Company build plate. And Mistral Green was a launch color on S40. So all these things, like the color, the SVP option pack, the fact that it was only on the market for like a year makes this combination a really scarce car, especially in this condition and being one family owned.
So I think let's take it for a spin. I think it's time for a retro review. So here we are in the Mazda 323, but before we start, let's me be a little honest here and tell you a story about the time I drove my brother's car like this to the Standard 9 prom. And it was the Meteor actually, which was the sedan version, but it felt almost exactly the same. I did crash that car into a pavement with me and my friends all in it. Now, obviously we couldn't let a crash stand between us and a good time, so we continued with our Standard 9 prom and then partied right through the night, and then the next morning I had to explain to my brother exactly why the front of the car was hanging off. But this time though, I don't suspect any of that is going to happen. In the middle over there is that very familiar looking clock in the green font, and for anybody that's had one of these cars, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Then of course there's this edgy squared off dash, which was a mainstay for cars of this name, ilk and era. You've also got this interesting switch on the side here, which is I've never seen on something like this, that is to brighten or dim the dash. These little intricate features are what makes the SVP an MVP. The window winders in here are still very, very slick and loose, something that many cars of this age aren't able to do. There is no electric window option on this one, unfortunately. And that brings me to the cloth interior on the side with leather or pleather inserts. I was always quite interested in why they chose this pattern, but even after all these years, it's still kind of cheeky and funky and does seem to work. But what I really like about this car is just the sheer familiarity of everything, the shapes, the shape of this rear view mirror, the shape of these door locks over there, and don't forget, this one has central locking too. Then there's the shapes of the light switches and the switch gear and the way they feel when you work them. It's so familiar because this car was for sale for so long that South Africans, all of us, have had some sort of experience with the 323 Mazda or the Ford Laser. According to our research, this car has about 54 kilowatts. Sounds pretty frisky. Let's see how it goes. Oh, there we go. Now, there's no rev counter, so you gotta be aware that if you rev it too high, you could probably blow this little carb engine to smithereens. But I can still remember Standard 9 Prom doing exactly this with my brother's car, and yeah, it didn't end well. But what does end well are these gear changes. The clutch action feels so easy and familiar. The throttle pedal feels, again, firm and good and responsive. Then there's the way the notchy gear lever slots into position. And this again, such a throwback to this entire range of cars because it still feels exactly like I remember it. I gotta say, for nostalgic purposes, there are few cars, although they are slow cars, make me want to drive them fast. And this, thanks to my brother and the memories of using his car, sometimes without permission, and this is one of those cars. By modern standards, the 323 was never going to be perfect. It doesn't have a place to put my cell phone. And well, this is from a time where we definitely didn't talk on our phones and drive, and we actually had conversations with the people next to us, although sweaty because there wasn't aircon. It's also the kind of car that you better make sure you have the keys on you, because remember, 90s cars tend to lock randomly from time to time, if you can recall. It's the Mazda 323 Sting, folks, and this is Retro Review, and I'd officially like to welcome this car to the stable because we at All Things Motoring just bought it.